Well, this is the day the Lord has made, and we're here to rejoice and be glad in it. I want to welcome you to another segment of Morning Dew as presented by the Hope TV. It is my prayer today that you are blessed and that you're safe and that you're well, that you're happy, that you're prosperous, and that you're walking in the favor of God and that you're maintaining a good, sound mind. We're living in some perilous times, but in spite of that, God is still good. And we want to give you a practical word in these perilous times to let you know that the word of God will not return void. I want you to know that in spite of what we see on the news cycles, and in spite of what you may be feeling, God is not slack concerning his promise. And all the promises of God are yea and amen. So it is our pleasure to present to you Morning Dew. Personally, this is one of my favorite shows, if not my favorite show of the Hope TV. Because it gives us an opportunity to come and exchange and have a moment of sharing early in the morning. The Bible says, early in the morning will I seek thee. Song of the church, early in the morning our songs shall rise to thee. When we're fed spiritually early in the morning, I think it kind of sets the foundation for the rest of the day. And so this is our Morning Dew, and I hope you're prepared to be blessed by it. And if you've been blessed by any of the programming of the Hope TV, won't you drop us a line? Let us know the city and the state and the country from which you're viewing. We take your viewership very seriously. And if you're viewing from a state, from the city, from the country, our team takes those things into consideration as a part of the production of content because we want to minister specifically to everybody who supports us here at the Hope TV. I've been doing media a long time, literally all of my life, but we've ramped up our efforts over the pandemic, and it's amazing that our first broadcast was on March 19th. And from March 19th to today, we've had over 5 million views of our content from a cumulative perspective. So through all of our platforms, over 5 million views in a little over 30 days. Can you believe that? And we've come from one broadcast. Our first broadcast was entitled Pastoring in the Pandemic, and we still have that series going. But we've come from that one show to now we have 21 different programs and shows that we're offering on a weekly basis via the Hope T, and it's incredibly exciting. So I want to thank you for your support. Thank you for all you're doing to help us to carry positive content all over the world. And if you're watching through a platform that will allow you to subscribe, to like, or to send the link to someone else that you know can be inspired and empowered, won't you consider doing that? Follow us on all things social media. You can follow us and you can subscribe to the Hope TV YouTube channel. You can follow us on the Hope TV on Facebook. You also can follow us at the Hope TV on Twitter and on Instagram. So go ahead and do that right now. If you subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook. Also follow us on Instagram and Twitter, but specifically when you subscribe to the YouTube channel and Facebook by following Hope TV, whenever new content is uploaded, you'll get that notification. And so you'll never get lost about our schedule. We try to present daily schedules and weekly schedules on our platforms just so you know what you can expect. But please know that every day on these platforms, you can expect to get some positive and online content from the Hope TV. And so if you're watching on Apple TV, Roku TV, Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Periscope, through the House of Hope ATL website, through the edewissmith.org website, or through the House of Hope app, your support means the world to us. So let me thank you again for all you're doing. And won't you also consider following us on all things social media? Follow the House of Hope. You can follow the House of Hope Atlanta YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and when content is loaded there, you get notifications. Follow the House of Hope Atlanta on Facebook, and you can follow us at the House of Hope HOH ATL on Twitter and HOH ATL on Instagram. So stop, pause right now, follow us. It's certainly be a blessing to us. And of course, you can follow me at edewissmith on Instagram and Twitter, the official page of Pastor E. Dewey Smith on Facebook, and Dr. E. Dewey Smith on YouTube. So follow me as well. I certainly will be blessed and certainly appreciate your support of our social media platforms. And thank God for the medium of technology. Thank God because in a pandemic like this. Can you imagine going through something like this and not being able to get to a local facility or get to a house of worship or get to a physical building without having an opportunity to connect? So even in difficult times, I'm grateful because now we can share the gospel, and now we're able to share the gospel even more with people all over the world. Jesus did say greater works you'll be able to do. I don't think he was talking about greater in quality, because there's nothing greater you can do than die for the sins of the world. There's no greater act, but greater in quantity, because now through the medium of technology, literally revival is breaking out over the world, and it's happening from a technological space. So thank you so very much. I've been praying about this whole Morning Dew episode, and praying about what God would have me to share with you. And I've been just really troubled by how COVID-19 has affected us financially. It's affecting so many people. Over 30 million Americans have filed for unemployment, and those who are eligible, that's about 20% of the workforce here in America. These levels are now reaching the levels of the Great Depression, and it's on track to exceed those levels. So the worst economic climate, literally on over 80 years, and in 90 years actually. And you couple that now with the reality of how it's affecting us from a physical perspective. 70% of the deaths in Louisiana, black people. Over 40% of the deaths in Illinois and Michigan, black people. Over 80% of the hospitalizations of COVID-19 in Georgia, black people. And when you see things are happening, and it seems like there's spiritual wickedness in high places, and governmental leaders are now placing profits over people. When the governor of Indiana, Governor Holcomb, has explicitly stated that he wants churches to release the restrictions and allow churches to gather. And that way churches, in his words, quote unquote, will now become control or test groups. So they can watch what happens in churches and watch 14 to 21 days later and see how the virus responds to people as they gather for church, since the churches will be test or control groups. And it makes you wonder how they tend to understand that some African Americans want to worship anyway, regardless, because of our faith. And the reality is that many people are being used as guinea pigs and lab rats. It's as if we're the Tuskegee experiment all over again. And when you ponder these realities, it makes you wonder, where is God, and how we're going to make it in the face of unemployment. Business owners are trying to figure out what they're going to do and how they're going to make it. As states ease the restrictions on going back to work, landlords and persons who own high rises are now demanding that their tenants who are leasing the buildings, would be barbers or insurance agents or what have you, travel agents or beauticians, or people who own spas who don't own the buildings. They now can apply to have their rent released, to get some type of relief from rent and lease payments and mortgage payments, because the states are now open. And since the states are now open, that means that the persons who are leasing those facilities don't have to give them any reprieve, and they're still expecting to receive rent and lease payments. And so a whole lot is going on here in the world, and $1,200 for a stimulus check that people received weeks ago is long gone. And I was wondering, what does the Lord have to say to us? And is there a word from the Lord that I can share with you for this episode of Morning Dew? And with that being said, I want to call your thoughts. That's a very powerful passage I want to share with you. It's in 2 Corinthians in the 4th chapter. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, there's a powerful word there I want to lift for you. I want to lift it both in the King James and the Message translation. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. I believe it's so apropos, and I hope you write these scriptures down and you can read them in your leisure. But it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and the 8th verse. In 2 Corinthians 4 and 8, you see these words of St. Paul. St. Paul says, we're troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We're perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, cast down, but not destroyed, always bearing in the body the dying of the Lord Jesus, that the life of Jesus may be made manifest in our bodies. Do you see what he says? He says that we're troubled on every side. I want to read the Message rendering for you. It reads a little differently, but it's just as powerful. What Paul says, Eugene Peterson's, he puts it this way in the Message translation of the scriptures, and I'll read this for you. He says in verse number 7 through verse number 10, he says, if you only look at us, you might well wish the brightness. We carry this precious message around in the unadorned clay pots of our ordinary lives. That's to prevent anyone from confusing what's God's incomparable power with us as it is. There's not much of a chance. He says, we've been surrounded and battered by troubles, but we're not demoralized. We're not sure what to do, but we do know that God knows what to do. We've been spiritually terrorized, but God hasn't left our side. God hasn't left our side. We've been spiritually terrorized, but God hasn't left our side. He states the reality here in that Message Bible. He says, we're not sure what to do. And we're not sure what to do. And I wondered, why does Paul make that declaration? And it's interesting that Paul here is this tent maker from Tarsus, who in retrospect looks at his life and he thinks about his life, how, he says that he's been in stripes above measure. He's endured that. He's been imprisoned frequently. He's faced death with plurality. He says 5 times he was horrified by the Hebrews with 39 stripes, 3 times beaten with rods, 1 time stoned, 3 times shipwrecked, day and night in the depths of the sea, and in journeyings often and on perils of water, frightened by robbers, kicked to the curb by kinfolk, guarded by the Gentiles, hated by the Hebrews, hurting, hungry, horrified, sleepy, fooled by fake folk, cold and naked. Paul says, I want you to understand that. He says, we've been surrounded and battered by trouble, but we're not demoralized. He says, we're not even sure what to do. And in this day and time, I think there are many people who have that reality. They just don't know what do we do in times like these. People trying to figure out, do we go back to work? Do we not go back to work? School systems are trying to figure out, do we have summer school? Do we not have summer school? Persons who make plans to go on a cruise for vacations, and they're trying to figure out, do I get my money back now? Do I miss my deposit? People trying to find out, if I've been investing in business, do I invest now? Do I not invest? Persons who are thinking about buying property, do I buy property? Do I not buy property? Pastors trying to figure out, do I go back to the church, to the building? Do I not go back to church? A whole lot of uncertainty right now about what do we do in our lives. And Paul admits, he says, with everything that's going on around us, he says we're surrounded by so much that we don't know what to do. Battered by troubles. He says, we really don't know what to do. And I wanted to ask the question, Paul, he says, I want to talk about our horrible frustrations. He says, and that's what you see in this passage. He says, our horrible frustrations, our horrible frustrations. He says, we've been surrounded. That's the word that the Message Bible uses. We're surrounded and battered by trouble. We're surrounded and battered by trouble. Surrounded and battered. King James, verse 8, he says, we're troubled on every side. Surrounded and battered is the Message Bible. Troubled on every side is the King James translation or rendering of it. What happens when you're surrounded and battered on every side? Surrounded and battered, troubled on every side. Just literally surrounded. It's inside, outside, hard pressed. Everywhere you look, people are trying to figure things out. It's just a quandary. Governmental leaders are trying to figure out, do we allow the economy to tank? If the economy tanks and people can't work, then what does that do to our quality of life? If people can't work, if the whole American economy shuts down, what does that do for people who can't provide for their families? If we go back to work and people are sick and people get sick, and what does that do? We go back to work and people get sick and now they pass away. Everybody's trying to figure out what do we do? Pastors are trying to figure out do we continue to not pay our staff? We haven't met in months. Do we meet? Do we not meet? Do we what does it look like when we go surrounded by stuff? Make matters worse, we found out about a young man, Omar Berry, that got shot to death in Brunswick, Georgia, back in February. Shot down, modern day lynching happened in February, and we're just now hearing about this story now. And it's to this date, it's murderous. It's all on video, captured everywhere. And to this date, a grand jury still not being called. Surrounded by chaos, surrounded by trouble. And it's sad when you can go and get a tattoo in Georgia right now, but can't call a grand jury in Georgia for justice. I mean, we're surrounded by stuff, surrounded by issues. Have an election coming up. Political conventions are supposed to meet. It's surrounded by trouble. They're telling us that once we come through this wave of the virus, we can expect a second wave to come in late summer, early fall. Surrounded by trouble. And Paul says, we have some horrible frustrations. Every side, inside, out, heart fresh. And because we're surrounded, he says, with these horrible frustrations, we're surrounded by the chaotic. He says, not only that, but we're sometimes confused. This is point 1B. Our horrible frustrations is point. We're surrounded by the chaotic. That's 1A. 1B was sometimes confused. Look what he says here. He says we're troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed. The word perplexed is the word that he uses in the King James. He says, so not only are we troubled on every side, we are perplexed. That word, we're confused. We are at loss. When you look at the Message rendering of that same verse number 8, I like how Eugene Peterson puts it. Paul says we are perplexed. But verse 8 in the Message Bible, Eugene Peterson says, we're not sure what to do. And I'm sure that's somebody who's watching me right now who's been in a similar situation in life where you really don't know what to do. And when you look at what's happening in our world, that phrase personifies can be spoken by so many people of every ethnic persuasion, of every political affiliation, of every class structure around the world. Many people right now don't know what to do, trying to figure out the next steps of their lives. What about those who plan on getting married in June and have bought the dresses and already secured the caterers and the facilities? What do you do now in the month of May? Don't know what to do. And people look at the situation around them right now, and it seems like it's dark. It seems like people don't understand what the next step is, and so it's sometimes confused. And it's okay. It's okay to admit that you don't understand. And one of the best things to do is not to act like you understand when you don't understand. Our horrible frustrations, we're surrounded by the chaotic. We are sometimes confused. He says, not only that, but we are also strongly criticized. We're strongly criticized. He says this, we're strongly criticized. Look what he says in the King James Version. He said, we're troubled on every side, yet not distressed. We are perplexed. We're puzzled. We are at a loss. We don't have a way out. He says, not only that, but we are persecuted. We're persecuted. That means we're strongly criticized. It literally means to be pursued and harmed. He says it seems that somebody's trying to harm us. It makes you wonder with some of the decisions that have been made to open up certain businesses. It makes you wonder, is there an attempt to harm certain groups? When essential workers now typically look like those who have a darker hue, those whose pigmentation may resemble mine. Makes you wonder sometimes, is there an intention to harm us? Is there intentional persecution? You look at one prison in Louisiana, out of 195 prisoners in that prison, women in that prison, 192 of them have contracted coronavirus. It makes you wonder, is there an intent to physically cause harm? When you think about the fact that barbershops are open, but the governor's mansions are not yet open. Why do certain businesses that seem to tend to affect one population more than the other, why are those open? It makes you wonder sometimes. We're going through all types of strong condemnation. He says, and here's the reality. He says, and our spirits are cast down. Our spirits are cast down. He says, persecuted, but not forsaken. He says, cast down. He said, I want you to understand that we are cast down. That's what the King James says. He said, our spirit is downtrodden right now. We don't feel our best. That's what he says right there in verse number 9. He says, we're persecuted. He says, we're cast down. When we look at what's going on, it can cause a melancholy spirit to come over us. When you put Eugene Peterson's Message Bible up, those same passages, I want to see how he says it. He says, listen, he says, we've been surrounded by troubles, but we're not demoralized. He says, we're not sure what to do, but we know that God knows what to do. He says, we've been spiritually terrorized. He says, we've gone through some spiritual terrorism that's caused us to be shaken. And he says, but here's the reality. Here's the reality. He says, but in the midst of all of those frustrations, can I tell you what he says? I love this. This is why I want to use this verse. He says, but God hasn't left our side. I want you to know, my beloved, that even though those other realities and those other emotions may be real, I don't want you to bury your heads in the sands and say things like, I'm not claiming it. No, we have to accept the reality. You can't say, I'm not claiming that there isn't a coronavirus. No, faith does not mean that you deny reality. No, the coronavirus is real. The coronavirus is present. The coronavirus has power. But in spite of its power, in spite of its realness, in spite of us having to take precautions, here is the blessing for us. God hasn't left our side. I don't care who you are, where you've been, and what you've been through. I want you to know that you've got the blessed assurance from the divine that he will never leave you, nor will he forsake you. That even in the most difficult and deplorable and dismal moments of your life, God is right there. When you can't see him, God is right there. When you can't feel him, God is right there. When you can't trace him, God is right there. When you're confused, cast down, and feeling despondent, don't you ever forget, my beloved, that God is right there. I want you to type that right there. I want you to type that in while you watch it. God has never left my side. Type it in right now. God has never left my side. As a matter of fact, Jesus promised those disciples, and that promise reverberates to us. I will never leave you. Lo, I'm with you always. That's what he says in Matthew 28. Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. He says, if you teach them to observe all things, lo, I'll be with you always, even to the end of the world. That's the blessed assurance that he gave to them and that he gives to us as his disciples. I'll be with you always. And if the world has not ended, that means that he has not left us. And the fact that you can see my face here and hear this gospel being proclaimed right now through the internet waves, through cyberspace, is lets us know that the world has not ended. And since the world has not ended, Jesus Christ has not left us. I didn't say you wouldn't go through trials. I didn't say you wouldn't go through tribulations. But the blessed assurance is we're never left alone. He promised he'd never leave us alone. So Paul talks about our horrible frustrations, our horrible frustrations, our horrible frustrations. And he wants us to know that in the most difficult moments of our lives, that in the most despondent moments of our lives, that God has not left us. And that's what I want to talk. That's what I want to convey to you as you're watching. That in the good times, in the bad times, that God has not left you. I want to push that move. I had more to share. I'm going to share it next time. But I'm going to stop right there because I feel the Lord speaking right there and just want me to anchor ship right there. That doesn't matter what business is closed. It does not matter who's in office. It does not matter what kind of tricks and how they place profits over people and the economy over humanity. Even when economy has been placed over humanity, the economy has to bow to divinity. And divinity will be there no matter what happens with the economy, how much you struggle with your humanity. God's going to be there for you. And I want to let you know right now that in the most difficult moments of your life, that when you're surrounded by the chaotic, that when you're sometimes confused, that when you're strongly condemned, and when your spirits have been cast down, the blessing is that he's never left our side. The songwriter said, I've seen the lightning flashing. I've heard the thunder roar. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard a voice from heaven telling me still fight on. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. Never alone, never alone. He walks beside me all the way. He guides my footsteps every day. I don't have to worry because I'm never alone. And I want you to be encouraged here that you're never alone. You know why? Because he walks with you and he talks with you. And he tells you that we are his own. And the joy that we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. My beloved, I want you to rest in the promise and the assurance today that you're never left alone. Friends may leave. Fake friends may be discovered. Leeches will pull off. People's motives will be uncovered. But please understand that you're never left alone. My friends, I'm going to close this session of Morning Dew. But when we're troubled on every side, I'm going to put that scripture right back up there for you one more time. Eugene Peterson's Message translation. I want to read it one more time. I'm going to let you go because it's very, very important that you get that. He says in verse number 8, please get this. We've been surrounded and battered by troubles, but we're not demoralized. We're not sure what to do, but we know God knows what to do. We've been spiritually terrorized, but God has never left our side. And the same resolute assurance that Paul had as he faced the challenge of the chaotic, as he envisioned visions of vicissitudes, as he faced the probability of the problematic, the certainty was this: God hasn't left our side. I leave that word with you. Hold your head up. When you're social distancing and feel socially isolated, God is right there. I hope you've been blessed today. Please know, please be assured that God will never leave you nor forsake you. You've been watching Morning Dew. Until next time, always remember this. If you will be good to God, then God will be good to you.